Welcome to this short InputLayers tutorial. The objectives for this video are first to introduce the core concept behind InputLayers, then to explain how to configure your layers and priorities, and finally to demonstrate how it works. At its core, InputLayers is about simplifying the way in which you decide how and when inputs can interact with various parts of your game. So to start, let's look at how Unity's input system lets you assign action maps and what that workflow looks like. This is something you might already be familiar with, but I'm going to give a brief overview. There's tons of information you can get online about how this works. First, what you'll be doing is assigning your inputs using input actions assets. This is where you decide what a button is supposed to do. Then you'll need to repeat this for each action map, which are collections of buttons that can be used at a specific point in time for a specific purpose. So for example, if you have an environment in your game and then maybe a main menu, typically what you want to do is create an action map for each of these systems. And then you will want to enable or disable them through code, or maybe using Unity events if you're doing things through the inspector. This means that the character or environment would only react to inputs when its corresponding action map is enabled, and then you would disable that and enable the menu's action map, or when they are interacting with the menu exclusively. And though this system can be great, it can be quite complicated to handle when you start having many different elements that can interact with each other. Like, let's say, chat box, pop-ups, multiple action maps to handle character and vehicle movement, for example. You'll end up having to reassign each button for every individual action map, and then you'll have to keep track of which action map is currently active in order to disable it when some pop-up appears, make sure that you go back to the correct action map when the pop-up is closed, etc. Especially if, for example, another UI has appeared and it should take precedent over one that you've just enabled, which can get very complicated in terms of order of operation and keeping track of things properly. Another issue that's quite common is if you ever have to change the controls in your system or change how some input is used on a specific device, you might end up having to go in and redefine contents in dozens of different action maps, which can be quite tedious. So this is where InputLayers comes in. It's designed to be a more intuitive and user-friendly system that takes care of some of the complexities of handling inputs on its own. So let's have a look at how it works. First, you'll want to configure all the different inputs you're likely to use within a single input actions asset, though it does support multiple if for some reason that is necessary. Here I have a simple system with 3 different inputs. You'll notice I'm only using a single action map. In most cases, InputLayers can be a replacement for the actions map system, though it does support using action maps as well, which can be handy in some specific cases. That's up to you to figure out. Next, I'm going to open my InputLayers management window. If you haven't yet, you will need to assign the input actions asset you created here. This allows InputLayers to hook into the built-in logic to function using it directly. So next is a 2-level hierarchy. At the top level, we have priorities. An example I like to give to explain priorities is quite simple. You have a game in which you have a character that can move around and interact with things, but you've also got a few menus, let's say a main menu and maybe an inventory. You want to make sure that when you open those menus, the character can no longer move around and interact with things. So in this situation, you'd want to make sure that all of your character controls are set to priority 0, and all of your menu elements are set to priority 1. Right? So that even if a character comes online when a menu is open, the higher priorities take over and they remain in power, right? So the character controller layer will be active, but it will need to wait for all menus to be closed before it can come online. In other words, layers from higher priorities always take precedent over layers from lower priorities. So now we actually get to layers. These are things that can fight with each other for control. So an example for this would be if you have multiple versions of your character controls, one for vehicles, one for walking around, and one for aiming down sights, for example. When one is active, it should always take over whichever one was there before, within a single priority, of course. So much like a stack of cards, when one layer is enabled, it's placed on top and activated, and any layer that is now below it is disabled. But if you disable the top layer, removing it from the stack of cards, the last one that was visible beneath it becomes active. So a practical example of this could be you're walking around, you enter a vehicle, you're now driving, and if you exit the vehicle, it automatically goes back to walking, right? And it's important to keep in mind that you can remove or disable any layer, including layers that are in the middle of the stack, which means that when the top card gets taken off, it will skip those and go back to whatever was below them. That's it. It's actually a relatively simple system that just takes a bit of getting used to. If we look at the example scene here, just to demonstrate a bit further, you can see that we have a system with two layers, the base layer and a pop-up layer. When I press the Enter key, it activates this circle in the middle. I can do it repeatedly, and this is part of the base layer. But if I open the menu here in the top right, I've now switched to the pop-up layer. So pressing the Enter key no longer interacts with the circle that's behind. It's now only interacting with the buttons here on the pop-up. And that's it for today. I'll be sure to link the documentation for this asset in the description. If you have any questions or issues, there's systems in there using GitHub to be able to post about it, and I'll be sure to try and help. Have a great day.